Subscribe right now, because whatever just spoke to us from deep space was not random. And once you hear what it confirmed, you won't look at the night sky the same way again. If you think space is quiet and empty, stay here, because that belief just collapsed. For decades, we told ourselves that the universe doesn't care, that objects drift, stars burn, and planets spin without meaning or intent. Tonight's story challenges that comfort. What you're about to hear is not about science fiction, not about fantasy, and not about rumor. It's about a real interstellar object, tracked by real observatories, studied by real scientists, and followed all the way to a moment that forced some of the world's best minds to stop and say, something is wrong. It began the way many of the biggest discoveries do. Quietly. No countdown, no press conference, just a faint deviation buried inside automated survey data, a moving point of light that didn't behave like the thousands of others cataloged every month. The system that noticed it first was designed for speed, not curiosity. Its job is to scan the sky fast, flag threats, and move on. But this one didn't fit the boxes. It wasn't bound to the Sunday, it wasn't looping back, it wasn't slowing down. It was passing through. The object was eventually labeled 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object ever detected entering our solar system. Interstellar means something very specific here. Not from the Kuiper Belt, not from the Oort cloud, not even from the outskirts of our own system. This thing came from between the stars, from a direction and velocity that no natural solar system debris should have. Teams at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory began reconstructing its path backward through time. The math was clean, too clean. When you reverse its trajectory, it doesn't fan out into uncertainty like normal objects do. It points straight back into interstellar space, possibly toward the dense inner regions of the Milky Way. Not proof of anything on its own, but enough to make people pause. Then came the speed. 3I, Atlas, was not screaming through the system like a bullet, the way you'd expect from something falling into the sun's gravity well. It was coasting, smoothly, conservatively, almost politely. Its velocity profile looked optimized, as if minimizing stress, heat, and detection. Objects shaped by chaos don't move like that. They tumble, they flare, they leak energy. This one did none of those things. Ground-based observatories across the globe were queued up. Data from the European Southern Observatory confirmed brightness levels that didn't match the estimated size. Too reflective, too uniform. That alone set off internal debates. High reflectivity can happen naturally? Sure. Ice can do that. Certain minerals too. But the spectral signature wasn't lining up cleanly with known cometary ices or rocky asteroids. So the call went out to the most powerful instrument we've ever put into space. The James Webb Space Telescope shifted part of its observing schedule. Webb wasn't built for nearby objects. It was built to look back in time, to study early galaxies and newborn stars. But sometimes the most unsettling discoveries aren't far away. Sometimes they drift right past your front door. Webb's infrared instruments began returning data that made the room go quiet. Thermal behavior that didn't fluctuate randomly. Heat rising and falling in a repeating cycle. Not tied to rotation. Not tied to distance from the Sunday. A pulse. Subtle, but steady, like a slow breath. At the same time, Webb's spectrograph detected compounds that didn't neatly match any known class of natural interstellar material. Complex carbon-based structures, yes, but arranged with an order that raised eyebrows. Researchers at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics noted that while nature can produce complexity, it rarely produces symmetry at scale without violence. This object showed no scars of violence. No impact features, no chaotic layering. That's when the comparison started. Quietly at first, then more openly. In 2017, another interstellar object passed through our system, Oumuamua. It came and went fast, tumbling oddly, accelerating without an obvious cause, and leaving behind one of the most heated debates in modern astronomy. Some researchers, including Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb, argued that its properties were at least consistent with artificial origin. Others strongly disagreed. The data wasn't good enough. The window was too short. 3I Atlas changed that equation. This time, the data kept coming. Unlike Oumuamua, this object did not tumble chaotically. Its orientation was stable. Its brightness variations were minimal. Its motion suggested control, or at least correction. When solar radiation pressure should have nudged it one way, the deviation was damped. When gravitational perturbations from planets should have introduced noise, the trajectory remained clean. Engineers pulled archival information from old radio astronomy projects, including long-retired Arecibo Observatory datasets, looking for any precedent. There was none. What unsettled people wasn't any single measurement. It was the pattern across all of them. Then came the signal. It wasn't a loud broadcast. No movie-style transmission. No narrowband radio beam screaming hello. It was subtler. A low-energy electromagnetic anomaly repeating every 147 seconds. Weak enough to hide in noise if you weren't looking for it. Strong enough to be unmistakable once you were. The frequency didn't correspond to natural masers, pulsars, or known plasma oscillations. When researchers cross-checked that interval against historical data, something uncomfortable emerged. The same interval, faint and brief, had appeared once in late Oumuamua observations. Back then, it was dismissed as interference. Now it looked like a signature. Teams at the Keck Observatory joined the effort, refining optical measurements and polarization data. The reflection off 3I Atlas was not isotropic. It favored certain angles, like a surface designed to manage light, not just reflect it. As the object moved deeper into the inner solar system, something else happened. Its course adjusted. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. The change couldn't be explained by outgassing. There was no visible tail, no dust plume, no gas cloud. Yet the path bent, ever so slightly. Optimizing its passage relative to the plane of the planets, this is where the tone shifted from curiosity to concern. Because once you rule out natural forces, you're left with intent. And intent implies purpose, not necessarily hostility, not necessarily communication, but awareness. Internal discussions at NASA and ESA began circling the same uncomfortable question. What if this object isn't just passing through? What if it's surveying, or calibrating, or waiting? Astrophysicists familiar with theoretical work on interstellar probes, including concepts inspired by Stanford physicist Ronald Bracewell's ideas about autonomous messenger probes, started connecting dots they never expected to connect in real data. Bracewell probes, in theory, don't announce themselves. They observe, they listen, they respond only when certain conditions are met. And here we were, with a species that had just deployed the most sensitive space telescope in history, blasting radio signals across the solar system and actively scanning for life beyond Earth. Then came what many now call the final transmission. As 3I, Atlas approached the limit of Webb's optimal observation window. The repeating anomaly changed. The interval stayed the same, but the structure inside it shifted. Nested ratios appeared, prime number relationships, mathematical scaffolding that doesn't occur by accident, not in that order, not that clean. The data wasn't a message in words. It didn't say hello. It didn't say we come in peace. It didn't need to. It confirmed something far more unsettling. It confirmed that whatever this object is, it reacts to being observed. And that is where the real story begins. The moment that realization settled in, the room changed. Not dramatically, no alarms, no shouting, just a long pause that stretched far longer than anyone was comfortable with. Because reacting to observation is not a passive trait. Rocks don't do that. Ice doesn't do that. Even the strangest natural objects we've ever cataloged don't do that. Reaction implies feedback. Feedback implies awareness of state. And awareness, even at the most basic level, implies something that is not just drifting. What followed was weeks of verification. Every possible source of error was dragged into the light and interrogated. Instrument drift, software artifacts, thermal noise, cosmic ray interference. Teams cross-checked Webb's infrared data against optical readings from ground-based telescopes and older spectrographic records pulled from Hubble Space Telescope archives. The patterns held different instruments, different wavelengths, same behavior. That's when a small group inside the scientific community began using a word they avoided publicly. Not aliens, not spacecraft. The word was system. Because whatever 3I Atlas was doing, it wasn't random and it wasn't singular. Its heat pulses weren't noise. They were regulated. Its trajectory adjustments weren't reactions to chaos. They were corrections. And its emissions weren't broadcasts. They were acknowledgments. At the same time, radio observatories quietly began re-examining decades of deep sky data, especially regions aligned with the object's incoming path. Old recordings from decommissioned arrays, legacy sky surveys, anything that might show whether this had happened before. And something unsettling emerged. The path 3I Atlas followed was not unique. It intersected regions of space that had shown unexplained transient anomalies in the past. Weak, easy to ignore, always dismissed as noise. Until now. One astronomer involved in the review described it like realizing you've been seeing footprints for years but never noticed they formed a trail. When mapped together, those anomalies didn't scatter randomly across the sky. They lined up. Not perfectly, not obviously, but with enough coherence to suggest repetition. As if this wasn't the first time something had passed this way, just the first time we had the tools to notice. Meanwhile, engineers at the Deep Space Network began reporting something odd. Long-range telemetry links, the same infrastructure used to communicate with probes like Voyager 1 far beyond the heliosphere, were experiencing momentary phase distortions, tiny timing offsets, microsecond-level shifts that shouldn't happen in empty space. The same distortions appeared in archived Voyager 1 data when reanalyzed with updated models. Out there, far beyond the sun's influence, Voyager has been swimming through the interstellar medium for years. It measures plasma density, magnetic field strength, and cosmic ray flux. And recently, those measurements showed something unexpected. Regions of subtle order, not turbulence, not randomness, pockets where fields align more cleanly than theory predicted. At the time, it was chalked up to local variation. Now, in the context of 3I Atlas, it looked like infrastructure, or at least the residue of something that had passed through before. As public attention grew, official statements remained careful. Words like unusual, intriguing, and under investigation were repeated again and again. But behind closed doors, the tone was different. Because once you accept that something is reacting to you, you have to confront the next question. Why now? For billions of years, Earth has been loud. Lightning storms crackled. Magnetic fields churned. The sun screamed in radio frequencies. Yet nothing responded. Then in the last century, humanity began doing something new. We started emitting structured signals. Radar, television, deep space transmissions, directed energy. We began actively mapping the sky and probing the darkness with intent. And just as importantly, we began listening with unprecedented sensitivity. The activation of the James Webb Space Telescope marked a turning point. For the first time, we could detect faint thermal structures, subtle chemical fingerprints, and delicate motions that older instruments would have missed entirely. If something was waiting for a threshold, Webb may have crossed it. That idea made people uncomfortable because it flips the usual question. Instead of asking when we will find something out there, it asks when something out there decided we were worth noticing. As 3I Atlas continued its passage, Webb recorded something else. The object's surface reflectivity changed, not uniformly. Localized regions brightened and dimmed over time, slowly, deliberately, like reconfiguration. No known natural process explains surface restructuring on that timescale without energetic events. There were none. Researchers familiar with complex systems theory pointed out that the patterns resembled adaptive optimization. The same mathematics used to describe learning networks, swarm intelligence, and self-tuning materials. Not proof of intelligence, but proof of process. And then, just as quietly as it began, the signal changed again. The repeating interval stretched. The structure simplified. The emissions weakened. Not like a failure, like a conclusion. As if a handshake had completed. As if whatever test had been running had reached its endpoint. This was the moment some scientists now refer to as the confirmation. Not confirmation that aliens exist. Not confirmation of invasion or threat. Something more subtle, and in many ways more unsettling. Confirmation that the universe is not passive. That at least one system out there is capable of monitoring, responding, and moving with purpose across interstellar distances. 3. Atlas, did not transmit a warning in words. It didn't need to. Its final detectable behavior confirmed what many had feared but never proven. That humanity is no longer invisible. That our technological adolescence has crossed a line where observation is mutual. And as the object receded, slipping back into the dark between stars, one last question lingered in every serious discussion. Was this the end of the interaction, or simply the end of the introduction? Because if this was a probe, then probes don't travel alone forever. They report, they log, they return data. Somewhere, sometime, something may receive what 3I, Atlas, just collected. And if that's true, then the most important moment in this story is not when it arrived. It's when something else decides to follow. As that thought settled in, another layer of the puzzle began to take shape. One that didn't rely on speculation or theory, but on time. Because time is the one variable even the most advanced systems can't cheat forever. And when researchers laid the timeline of 3I Atlas over our own technological history, the overlap was unsettling. For most of human existence, we were quiet. Our planet glowed faintly in infrared. Our radio emissions were accidental, brief, and weak. Then, in a geological blink, everything changed. We split the atom. We filled the sky with radio noise. We bounced powerful radar beams off planets. We launched probes beyond our system and began shouting our location into the dark, convinced that silence meant safety and curiosity meant progress. What stood out was this. The first confirmed interstellar visitor appeared not long after Earth became unmistakably artificial from afar. City lights, nuclear signatures, directed radio signals. The second arrived after we placed permanent machines beyond the heliosphere. And now the third arrives, just as we deploy instruments capable of resolving structure, chemistry, and motion at levels never before possible. This isn't proof of cause, but in science, patterns don't need to be perfect to be meaningful. They just need to repeat. At the Vera Rubin Observatory, still preparing for full survey operations, astronomers reviewed simulations of how many interstellar objects should statistically pass through our solar system. The models predict far more than we've seen. Thousands, possibly millions, over the lifetime of the Sunday. And yet, we've detected only 3. That gap isn't trivial. It suggests either our detection methods are catastrophically incomplete, or that the ones we've seen are not representative samples. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if most interstellar objects don't want to be seen? 3. Atlas, by contrast, was detectable, but only just. Its brightness sat right at the edge of survey thresholds. Its emissions were subtle. Its behavior only obvious once attention was fully focused. To some researchers, it looked less like a beacon and more like a challenge. See if you're ready. See if you're paying attention. As the object continued outward, a multidisciplinary team began analyzing the mathematics embedded in its final signal, not decoding it as language, but treating it as structure, ratios, recurrence, compression, the same kinds of efficient encoding schemes used in modern error-correcting communication and data minimization. Techniques designed not to talk, but to confirm capability on the receiving end. In other words, the signal didn't say anything. It checked something. And humanity passed, at least partially. We noticed. We measured. We responded by pointing our best instruments at it. From the object's perspective, that might be all the confirmation required. This idea found resonance with older theoretical work that had long been dismissed as philosophical. Concepts discussed quietly in astrobiology circles at places like the Stanford University Physics Department, where Ronald Bracewell once proposed that advanced civilizations wouldn't waste energy broadcasting indiscriminately. They'd send out silent sentinels, observers, systems that wait until a species demonstrates the ability to detect and interpret subtle anomalies. If that framework is even partially correct, then 3I Atlas did exactly what it was supposed to do. It entered, it measured, it adjusted, it responded, and then it left. No greeting, no threat, no revelation, just confirmation. Meanwhile, as data analysis continued, a final oddity emerged. One that didn't come from space, but from us. During the period when Webb and multiple ground-based observatories were tracking 3I Atlas simultaneously, several independent research teams reported unusually synchronized errors in unrelated systems. Atomic clocks drifting together, satellite orientation glitches aligning in time. Minor, harmless events on their own, but collectively, statistically unlikely. It was as if the act of observing the object with concentrated, coordinated intent had produced a measurable footprint in our own technological environment. Not interference, not damage, correlation. That realization forced a philosophical turn that many scientists are still wrestling with. Observation is not neutral. At quantum scales, we accept this without hesitation. Measuring a system changes it. What if that principle doesn't stop at atoms? What if it scales? What if by observing 3I Atlas, we completed a circuit that had been waiting for closure? As weeks passed, the object faded. Its emissions dropped below detection limits. Its thermal signature flattened. Its reflective anomalies smoothed out. It became, once again, just another faint point sliding into darkness. And then, one night, it was gone. Not destroyed, not accelerated, simply out of reach. The official conclusion reads cautiously: no evidence of artificial origin, no confirmation of non-human intelligence, an unusual interstellar object requiring further study. The language is precise, conservative, safe, but among those closest to the data, there's a different understanding. Not shared in headlines, not written in press releases, a quiet agreement that something about this encounter was different. Not alarming in the cinematic sense, not reassuring either. More like a door that didn't open, but didn't stay fully closed. Because if 3I Atlas confirmed anything at all, it wasn't that we are in danger. It confirmed that we are visible, that we are capable of noticing subtlety, and that the universe, at least in one small, measurable way, noticed us, noticing it. And once that line is crossed, there is no going back to the comfort of silence. From that point on, the discussion stopped being about what 3I Atlas was made of and started revolving around something far more difficult to measure: intent over time. Because a single object can always be dismissed as coincidence. Two can still be argued away. But 3 interstellar visitors, each stranger than the last, arriving within a span that overlaps almost perfectly with our rise as a spacefaring, signal-emitting civilization that begins to look less like randomness and more like a sequence. One researcher described it using an old analogy from ecology. When you first walk into an untouched forest, animals freeze and watch. They don't attack, they don't flee, they observe. Only later do you realize how many eyes were on you the entire time. 3I Atlas felt like that moment of realization. Not panic, awareness. At the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, long-term models were quietly updated. Not models of impact or collision, but models of recurrence. How often could objects like this pass through our system? What trajectories would allow repeated access without detection? What regions of interstellar space act as highways rather than voids? The answers pointed to something unsettling. There are preferred paths between stars, shaped by gravitational gradients and magnetic structures we barely understand. Natural objects can use them. Design systems would exploit them. Meanwhile, archived data from the heliosphere boundary missions were re-examined. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, still whispering from beyond the sun's influence, had recorded subtle directional changes in cosmic ray flow over the years. At the time, these were attributed to turbulence in the interstellar medium, but when overlaid with the inferred inbound and outbound path of 3I, Atlas, the disturbances lined up too neatly to ignore. It was as if something had passed through those regions before, recently enough to leave fingerprints. The idea that space between stars is empty has always been a lie we tell ourselves for comfort. In reality, it's thin, structured, threaded with fields and particles. And structure invites use. The more scientists studied the region 3I Atlas traversed, the more it looked like a corridor. Not a tunnel you can see, but a route you can follow if you know how. As this picture emerged, a quiet shift happened in how people talked about the object. It was no longer referred to as a visitor. It became a process, a component of something larger, because nothing about its behavior suggested urgency. There was no rush, no dramatic maneuver, no burst of energy. Everything about 3I Atlas suggested patience. The kind of patience that comes from operating on timescales far longer than a human lifetime. That realization reframed the so-called final transmission, if it was final at all. The last detectable signal wasn't an exclamation point. It was a period, a closure of a loop, confirmation that the encounter had run its course. Some scientists began comparing the signal structure to checksum protocols used in deep space communication. You don't send them to convey meaning. You send them to verify integrity, to confirm that data arrived intact, that the system on the other end is capable of receiving and interpreting structure. If that's what this was, then 3I, Atlas, didn't tell us anything new about the universe. It told someone else something new about us. And that may be the part that confirmed what we all feared. Not invasion, not destruction, not even contact in the dramatic sense. What it confirmed is that we've crossed a threshold, that we are no longer just a planet with life. We are a planet with detectable agency, a system that acts, observes, and responds. For centuries, humanity has wondered whether we are alone. The more unsettling question now is whether we were ever truly unnoticed, because notice doesn't require conversation. It doesn't require intent to interfere. Sometimes it's enough to simply log a data point and move on. As the months passed and no further signals appeared, public interest faded, as it always does. New stories replaced old ones. Attention moved on. But the data didn't go away. It sat in archives, in servers, in the minds of the people who saw it up close and couldn't forget how clean it was, how deliberate. One of them put it this way: if this had been the first time anything like this happened, it would be terrifying. But because it fits into a growing pattern, it's worse. It suggests a universe that has rules we are only beginning to glimpse. Rules where civilizations don't announce themselves. They measure, they sample, they wait. And waiting is something the universe does very well. Out there, beyond the reach of our instruments, 3I, Atlas, is still moving, still following its path, still doing whatever it was designed or destined to do. And whether it ever returns is almost beside the point, because the confirmation didn't come from where it went next. It came from what it already learned. And that brings us to the moment where speculation gives way to consequence. Because once you accept that you've been measured, the next question isn't who did it. It's what happens after the measurement is complete. That question sat heavy because it doesn't ask for proof. It asks for patience. Measurements don't end stories. They start timelines. And timelines don't need to intersect immediately to matter. They just need to exist. Across research centers, the language began to shift in a subtle but important way. Not officially, not in writing meant for public eyes, but in how scientists framed their assumptions. Instead of asking what 3I, Atlas, was, they started asking what kind of environment would produce something like it. And more importantly, What kind of environment would deploy it? Because sending an object across interstellar space is not trivial. It demands energy budgets that dwarf anything we currently manage. It demands materials that survive radiation, micrometeoroid impacts, and timescales that grind most structures into dust. And it demands a reason, not curiosity. Curiosity alone doesn't justify that cost. Purpose does. One hypothesis began gaining quiet traction, not as a conclusion, but as a working framework. The idea that objects like 3I, Atlas, are not explorers in the romantic sense, but maintainers. Systems that move through star systems the way immune cells move through a body. Not attacking, not colonizing, monitoring, sampling, checking for change. In that model, civilizations are not rare sparks in a dark void. They are variables in a much larger equation. Variables that reach certain thresholds: energy use, signal complexity, spatial expansion. When those thresholds are crossed, the system responds. Not dramatically, just enough to register. That interpretation reframes the fear entirely. The fear isn't that something is coming, it's that something already came, did what it needed to do, and left without ceremony. As these ideas circulated, a parallel effort began on Earth. Scientists started watching ourselves, not culturally, technologically, monitoring global signal output, satellite density, electromagnetic noise, trying to understand what we look like from the outside. The answer was sobering. Earth doesn't whisper anymore. It hums, loudly. Artificial rhythms layered over natural ones. A planet that advertises complexity, whether it intends to or not. That realization led to a strange inversion. For decades, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence focused on listening. Listening for beacons, for messages, for signs of intent. But 3I, Atlas, suggested a different strategy entirely. One where advanced systems don't shout across the cosmos. They pass through. They look, they leave breadcrumbs only detectable to those ready to notice them. In that light, the absence of a clear message becomes the message. And that may be what its final detectable behavior confirmed, that the universe does not reward impatience. It responds to readiness. Not technological alone, but perceptual. The ability to see subtlety, to recognize structure where chaos is expected. When 3I, Atlas faded beyond our reach, it didn't close a chapter, it opened a constraint. We now know that something like this is possible, that interstellar space is not just a backdrop, but a medium. That movement through it can be purposeful. That observation can be reciprocal. And that knowledge changes how every future discovery will be interpreted. The next time an anomaly appears, it won't be dismissed so easily. The next time a signal looks too clean, too optimized, too patient, the comparison will already be there. The shadow of 3I, Atlas, will hang over it. Because the most unsettling part of this story isn't that something intelligent may exist beyond Earth. We've lived with that idea for a long time. The unsettling part is that intelligence may not announce itself when it finds you. It may simply check a box and move on. Out in the dark between stars, where time stretches and meaning thins, something confirmed what many feared but never proved. That we are no longer just observers of the universe. We are participants in a system far larger than ourselves. And participation, once begun, does not end quietly. Participation carries weight, and weight bends futures. Once that idea took hold, it became impossible to unsee the implications. Because systems that observe don't always act immediately. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they catalog. Sometimes they simply update a ledger and move on to the next entry, trusting time to do the rest. One of the quiet conclusions that emerged from internal discussions was this. If 3I Atlas was designed to notice civilizations, then it wasn't looking for perfection or peace. It was looking for transition. A moment when a species shifts from being bound to its planet to reaching beyond it, from passive to active, from noise to signal. By that measure, Earth crossed the line, not when we launched rockets, but when we began coordinating observation on a planetary scale. When telescopes on different continents, orbiting observatories, and deep space antennas started behaving like a single distributed organism, watching together, listening together, responding together. From the outside, that looks less like curiosity and more like coherence. And coherence is rare. In nature, coherence usually signals stability or intelligence, sometimes both. The terrifying possibility is that coherence is the only thing that matters. Not morality, not intent, just the ability to function as a system. As this interpretation spread, some scientists revisited old assumptions about the so-called Great Silence. The question of why, in a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars, we haven't heard anything. Maybe we were asking the wrong question. Maybe the silence isn't absence. Maybe it's restraint. If advanced systems exist, and if they operate on timescales that dwarf ours, broadcasting loudly would be inefficient, risky. Passing through quietly, measuring, and leaving minimal trace makes far more sense, especially if your goal is long-term stability rather than interaction. Under that framework, 3I, Atlas wasn't exceptional. It was routine. And that idea unsettled people more than any alien fantasy ever could. Because routine implies repetition. It implies that this has happened before, not necessarily here, somewhere else. Somewhere that reached the same threshold and triggered the same response. The realization reframed human history in an uncomfortable way. All our myths about watchers in the sky, all our stories about gods descending, messengers arriving, stars behaving strangely at pivotal moments. Not evidence of contact, but echoes of a deep instinct. The sense of being observed when you grow loud enough to be noticed. Of course, none of that can be proven. Science doesn't move on instinct, it moves on data. And the data, stripped of speculation, says this. An interstellar object entered our solar system. It displayed behavior inconsistent with known natural processes. It reacted to observation, it emitted structured signals, and then it left. That alone is enough to change the conversation forever. Because from now on, every future detection will be framed by this precedent. The next interstellar object won't just be studied for composition and orbit, it will be watched for response, for adjustment, for subtle feedback, and if one day something doesn't leave quietly, then this moment will be remembered as the warning we didn't recognize at the time. Not a warning of danger, a warning of relevance. Because the universe doesn't care about us in the way stories suggest. It doesn't fear us, it doesn't admire us, it doesn't need us. But systems don't need emotion to respond. They only need thresholds. And 3, Atlas confirmed that one of those thresholds has been crossed. Out there, beyond the reach of our instruments, the object continues on its path, carrying with it a record, not of who we are emotionally, but of what we are functionally. A species that observes the observer, a planet that listens when something whispers back. Whether that record is ever acted upon is a question for another time, maybe another century, maybe another civilization. But the confirmation remains. The universe is not unaware, and neither are we anymore. That awareness brings with it a strange kind of stillness. Not fear exactly, more like the moment after you realize you're no longer alone in a room you thought was empty. Nothing has changed physically, but everything has changed mentally. That's where humanity now finds itself, suspended between data and meaning. Because once the idea of being noticed enters the equation, it reshapes how you interpret silence. Silence is no longer absence. It becomes restraint, choice. And restraint implies capability. Researchers began revisiting one of the most uncomfortable assumptions in modern science, that intelligence naturally seeks to expand, communicate, and dominate. That belief is deeply human. It mirrors our own history. But 3I, Atlas suggested a different model, one where intelligence seeks balance, longevity, and minimal disruption. A model where survival favors those who touch lightly and move on. That model fits the data disturbingly well. The object didn't mine asteroids. It didn't harvest energy. It didn't approach Earth directly. It didn't announce itself. It passed through, optimized its path, sampled its environment, confirmed a reaction, and exited. Every step minimized risk. Every behavior conserved energy. Every interaction avoided escalation. That's not curiosity. That's protocol. Some scientists compared it to autonomous environmental probes we already send into hostile environments on Earth. Deep ocean sensors, Antarctic monitoring stations. They don't interact unless necessary. They don't reveal more than required. They gather data and leave before conditions change. If that analogy holds, then 3I, Atlas, wasn't sent to meet us. It was sent to evaluate the system we inhabit. That realization led to another unsettling thought. If the probe's goal was evaluation, then the most important data point may not have been our technology, but our response. Did we panic? Did we weaponize? Did we attempt interference? Did we behave coherently or chaotically? From the outside, Earth did something unusual. We didn't fire at it. We didn't chase it. We didn't try to intercept it. We watched, we measured, we debated, we argued. But we didn't act impulsively. That restraint may matter more than we realize. Because in complex systems theory, response quality often determines outcome more than capability. A system that overreacts introduces instability. A system that observes and adapts demonstrates maturity. And maturity may be the true threshold. This is where the phrase final transmission takes on its real meaning. Not as a dramatic farewell, but as the end of an evaluation cycle. The last detectable signal wasn't meant to warn us. It was meant to close a loop, to confirm that the observation phase had completed successfully. In that sense, nothing was said because nothing needed to be said. The confirmation was implicit. We noticed. We understood enough to be unsettled. And we did not break. That combination may be rare, which brings us to the part most people avoid thinking about. If this was an evaluation, then evaluations are not one-time events. They are periodic. They repeat on timescales that make human history look like a footnote. 3I. Atlas may not return, but something like it almost certainly will. And next time, the variables will be different. Our technology will be louder, our presence more expansive, our footprint harder to ignore. The margin for subtlety will shrink. That's what it confirmed. Not that something is coming tomorrow, not that we are in danger tonight, but that the era of cosmic anonymity is over. From now on, every step outward is also a signal inward. Every telescope we point, every probe we launch, every transmission we send adds another line to a record we do not control. And the universe, it seems, keeps records very well. When people ask why this matters, the answer is simple. Because once you know you're part of a larger system, pretending otherwise becomes the most dangerous choice of all. And that is the quiet weight 3I, Atlas left behind as it slipped back into the dark. What followed wasn't panic. It was recalibration. A slow, almost uncomfortable shift in how people inside the field talked when the cameras were off. Because once the idea of anonymity dies, the question is no longer times are we alone asterisk, but times how are we seen asterisk. For generations, humanity imagined first contact as an event. Lights in the sky, signals decoded on live television, a moment you could point to and say, this is when everything changed. But 3I, Atlas, suggested something far more realistic and far more unsettling. That contact doesn't arrive as a moment. It arrives as a process. Processes don't care about drama. They care about thresholds, feedback, and outcomes. The more researchers studied the data, the more it became clear that nothing about 3I, Atlas, was rushed. It didn't accelerate dramatically when discovered. It didn't alter course sharply when observed. It didn't react emotionally, if that word even applies. Everything happened slowly, deliberately, as if time itself was a resource it had in abundance. That alone says something profound. Whatever created or shaped this object was not operating on human urgency. It didn't need quick answers. It didn't need immediate results. It could afford to wait decades, centuries, even longer for conditions to be right. And conditions may finally be right now. One detail that kept resurfacing in private analysis sessions was how little energy the object expended. No massive propulsion, no explosive maneuvers, no waste. In human terms, it behaved like a species that had already passed through its reckless phase. One that had learned, possibly the hard way, that survival favors restraint. That realization forces an uncomfortable mirror back onto us. Because we are loud, we are fast, we are inefficient. Our technology leaks energy in every direction. From a distance, Earth doesn't look like a quiet cradle of life. It looks like a system in adolescence. Bright, noisy, unstable, full of potential, but not yet disciplined. If 3i Atlas was evaluating anything, it may have been asking a simple question. Is this system worth engaging now, later, or not at all? And the answer may not require immediate action. This is where fear quietly enters, not as terror, but as humility. Because the most frightening possibility isn't invasion or destruction, it's indifference. The idea that something far more advanced could notice us, measure us, and decide that we're not ready, not interesting enough, not stable enough. That would mean no contact. No warning, just silence. But not the comforting kind. As months passed with no new signals, some people took that silence as reassurance. Proof that the concerns were overblown, that 3i, Atlas, was just another strange rock, and that the universe had returned to normal. Others understood it differently. Silence after observation is not absence, it's delay. Think about how we treat environments on Earth that are fragile or volatile. We study them remotely. We observe patterns. We wait. We don't intervene until the system stabilizes or reaches a point where interaction won't cause collapse. From that perspective, the lack of follow-up wasn't comforting. It was consistent. And that's what the final transmission truly confirmed. Not that something hostile is on the way. Not that we are about to be contacted, but that we are now on a timeline that doesn't belong to us. A timeline where observation precedes decision, where decision precedes action, and where action, if it ever comes, will feel sudden, only because we weren't patient enough to see the process unfolding. Out there, beyond the reach of our instruments, 3i, Atlas, continues its journey, carrying a record of a small blue planet that finally noticed it was being noticed. Whether that record is ever read again is unknown. But the confirmation remains quiet and heavy, like a truth you can't unlearn. We are no longer hidden. And once that realization takes root, it changes how you interpret everything that came before it. The myths, the questions, the centuries of wondering whether we mattered on a cosmic scale. Because being hidden and being irrelevant are not the same thing. 3i Atlas suggested that relevance doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly, logged in a dataset somewhere far beyond our reach. One of the most unsettling discussions that followed wasn't about technology at all. It was about patience. Whatever system launched or shaped 3i, Atlas did not rush. It did not hurry to conclusions. It did not escalate when it was noticed. That alone tells us something important. Urgency is usually a sign of limitation. The absence of urgency suggests confidence that time is on your side. That kind of confidence is almost impossible for humans to fully grasp because our history is compressed. We measure progress in years, sometimes decades, but an interstellar system doesn't need to think that way. It can afford to wait for stars to move, for civilizations to rise and fall, for planets to change their faces entirely. From that perspective, a century is nothing. 1,000 years is a pause. So when people ask what 3i Atlas confirmed, the honest answer isn't about aliens or machines or danger. It confirmed scale. It confirmed that the universe operates on levels of patience and complexity we are only beginning to sense. It also confirmed something else, something much closer to home, that our own behavior matters long before any dramatic encounter ever happens. Not what we say, but how we act when we realize we are not alone in the way we once thought. We didn't chase it. We didn't attack it. We didn't try to control it. We watched. We argued. We learned. That response may have been the most important data point of all. Because if you imagine being on the other side of this encounter, if you imagine sending a silent system across interstellar space to evaluate emerging civilizations, what would you be looking for? Raw power? Probably not. Aggression? Definitely not. You'd look for restraint, for coherence, for the ability to observe without destroying. And in that moment, imperfect as we are, humanity showed at least a hint of that capacity. That doesn't mean we pass some cosmic test. It doesn't mean we're safe or special. It simply means we're visible and we didn't fail immediately. That's not a celebration. It's a responsibility. Because the next time something unusual appears in our sky, we won't have the luxury of innocence. We'll know that observation is not one way, that curiosity is not private, that every probe we launch, every signal we send, every line of data we collect adds to a story that may be read by something else. And stories have consequences, even when they unfold slowly. 3I. Atlas didn't shout a warning. It didn't threaten. It didn't promise anything. It did something far more powerful. It confirmed what many feared but never wanted to accept, that we are part of a much larger system, that the system notices change, and that change, once noticed, is never truly ignored. As the object disappeared into the darkness beyond our instruments, it left us with no answers we could point to on a screen. No images dramatic enough to silence doubt. Just a shift in perspective that refuses to go away. The universe didn't speak to us. It acknowledged us. And that, for the first time in human history, may be enough to change everything that comes next. That acknowledgement lingers in a way facts alone usually don't, because facts can be debated, reframed, even forgotten. But perspective, once shifted, has a way of settling in and quietly changing how you see everything else. After 3I, Atlas slipped beyond our ability to track it. A strange calm followed. No new signals, no follow-up objects, no sudden revelations. To the outside world, it looked like the story had ended. But for the people closest to the data, it felt more like the end of the prologue. Because nothing about the encounter suggested urgency. And urgency, in cosmic terms, is often a sign of danger. This wasn't danger. This was assessment. Think about how humans explore unfamiliar territory. We don't rush into places we don't understand anymore. We send drones, we map, we watch patterns, we leave sensors behind. Only after long observation do we decide whether to step closer or back away. That behavior isn't driven by fear. It's driven by experience. If 3I, Atlas, was built or shaped by something that has survived long enough to master interstellar travel, then experience is the one thing it has in abundance. And experience teaches patience. One subtle but telling detail came from the way the object handled energy. It never absorbed more than it needed, never radiated excess heat, never pushed its systems hard. That's not how young technology behaves. That's how old technology behaves. The kind that has already learned the cost of waste. Which leads to another uncomfortable thought. If systems like this exist, then they may not be rare accidents. They may be the end result of civilizations that survive their own dangerous phases. The ones that didn't burn themselves out, the ones that learned restraint early enough. From that perspective, 3I, Atlas, wasn't advanced because it was powerful. It was advanced because it was quiet. That quietness forces a kind of honesty. Because if something is watching, then the story we tell about ourselves matters less than the one our actions reveal. And right now, humanity is at a crossroads that has nothing to do with aliens and everything to do with maturity. We are expanding faster than our wisdom, launching more satellites than we can track, broadcasting more noise than we can manage, reaching outward before we've fully stabilized inward. From a distance, that looks like growth. But it also looks like volatility. If there's a broader system at work, one that monitors rather than intervenes, then volatility is not attractive. Stability is. And that may be the most sobering implication of all. That the universe doesn't reward ambition, it rewards balance. 3I. Atlas didn't confirm that something is coming. It confirmed that something is capable of waiting. And waiting is often the most powerful position of all. Because while we debate timelines and speculate about intent, time continues to pass. Civilizations change, priorities shift, decisions made now echo forward in ways we can't fully predict. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of our instruments, a record exists. Not carved in stone, not written in language, but encoded in behavior. How a young technological species reacted when it realized the universe might not be empty after all. That record doesn't judge. It doesn't care about our stories or our fears. It simply exists, ready to be referenced when the next decision point arrives. And whether that moment comes in decades, centuries, or millennia, the groundwork is already laid. Because the most important thing 3I Atlas confirmed was never about what it was. It was about who we are becoming. Who we are becoming is not decided in moments of discovery, but in what follows after the excitement fades. That's the part most stories skip. The quiet stretch where nothing seems to happen, yet everything is slowly being set. After 3I, Atlas vanished from view, research didn't stop. It narrowed. Instead of chasing spectacle, scientists began asking smaller, sharper questions. If this object reacted to observation, what level of observation mattered? Was it infrared sensitivity, signal coordination, data integration across instruments, or something deeper, like collective intent expressed through technology? Those questions pushed teams to revisit how observation itself works at scale. The idea that looking is passive began to erode. Observation, when synchronized across platforms, becomes an action. A declaration that a system is capable of coherence. And coherence is not accidental. It's learned. This led to a subtle but profound shift in thinking. Maybe the universe doesn't respond to intelligence. Maybe it responds to coordination. A single telescope is curiosity. A network of telescopes is capability. A planet that can focus its attention is something else entirely. From that angle, 3I, Atlas, didn't arrive because we were intelligent. It arrived because we were becoming integrated. That idea unsettled people because it suggests a mirror. The same way we classify exoplanets, not just by size and temperature, but by atmospheric chemistry and stability. Perhaps civilizations are classified by behavior, not biology. Not who they are, but how they act over time. And behavior leaves patterns. The pattern we left during the passage of 3I. Atlas was one of restraint mixed with obsession. We watched intensely, but we did not interfere. We argued fiercely, but we did not fracture. Different nations, institutions, and ideologies shared data, if imperfectly, but still shared it. That matters. In complex systems, cooperation under uncertainty is one of the strongest indicators of resilience. A system that can tolerate ambiguity without collapsing is a system worth monitoring further. That may be the quiet reason the object left without escalation. Not because we were ignored, but because we were incomplete. Still becoming, still noisy, still unstable, but not irredeemably so. There's a tendency to frame cosmic stories around fear because fear is immediate. It grabs attention. But fear is not what lasts. Responsibility lasts. The kind that settles in slowly once you realize that your actions might be part of a much larger feedback loop. 3I. Atlas didn't force that responsibility on us. It revealed it. From now on, we don't get to pretend that our technological footprint is invisible. Every satellite constellation, every deep space transmission, every coordinated observation adds another layer to how we appear from the outside. Not as individuals, not as nations, but as a single, complex, uneven system. That realization strips away comforting narratives. There is no single hero, no single decision maker, no single moment where everything changes. There is only accumulation, behavior layered over time. And accumulation is exactly how long-lived systems think. The universe doesn't rush judgment because it doesn't need to. It lets systems reveal themselves. It watches for consistency, for learning, for correction. 3I. Atlas may have been one pass through our neighborhood, one glance, one measurement. But measurements are not erased once taken. They become reference points. If something like this appears again, and the odds say it will, it won't arrive in a vacuum. It will arrive to a planet that has already been logged, already partially understood, already categorized. That's not destiny. It's context. And context shapes outcomes long before events feel dramatic enough to name. So when people ask what the final transmission confirmed, the most honest answer is this. It confirmed that we are being evaluated not by what we claim, but by what we consistently do, not by our curiosity, but by our discipline, not by our fear, but by our ability to live with uncertainty without destroying ourselves in the process. The universe didn't lean closer, it waited. And waiting, when backed by patience and scale, is never meaningless. Waiting creates space. And space, ironically, is where growth either happens or collapses. In the months after 3I, Atlas faded into the background noise of the cosmos. Something subtle but important shifted inside the scientific community. Not a headline shift, a mindset shift. Fewer people were asking when the next object would arrive. More people were asking what kind of civilization we would be when it did. Because readiness isn't binary. It's not something you suddenly have or don't have. It's something you move towards slowly, often without realizing it, through thousands of small decisions that feel unrelated at the time. How transparent are we with our data? How cooperative are we across borders when uncertainty is high? How quickly do we reach for control instead of understanding? Those questions started to matter in a way they never had before. The unsettling thing about 3I Atlas is that it didn't force any of this. It didn't demand answers. It didn't impose consequences. It simply existed long enough for us to notice, and then it left. And in doing so, it revealed how much of our anxiety comes not from threat, but from self-awareness. We are not afraid because something might be out there. We are afraid because we don't yet know who we are when we realize something else might be watching. That's the part no telescope can measure. Humanity has always defined itself by contrast. Earth versus space, life versus emptiness, us versus the unknown. But the encounter with 3I, Atlas, blurred those boundaries. It suggested that the unknown is not chaotic, it's structured. And structure implies history, rules, and restraint. If there is a broader system in play, one that monitors emerging civilizations, then its greatest weapon isn't force, it's time. Time allows immature systems to reveal their flaws. It allows stable ones to demonstrate resilience. And it removes the need for intervention almost entirely. In that context, the absence of drama is the most dramatic thing of all. No arrival, no warning, no departure ceremony. Just a quiet pass-through and a record updated somewhere beyond our reach. That record doesn't care about our stories. It doesn't care about our fears or hopes. It doesn't care what we think it means. It only reflects what happened. And what happened is this. A young technological civilization noticed something subtle and strange. It observed carefully, it argued loudly, it speculated wildly, but it did not lash out. It did not fracture completely. It did not destroy itself in the process. That may sound like a low bar, but on cosmic timescales, it might be everything. Because civilizations that don't meet that bar don't leave much behind to observe. They burn fast, they vanish, and the universe moves on without ever needing to acknowledge them. 3I, Atlas didn't confirm that we are special. It confirmed that we are still here, still learning, still unstable, still incomplete, but capable of noticing when the universe nudges us just enough to see ourselves more clearly. That's why the fear lingers. Not because something terrible is coming, but because something patient exists. And patience, when combined with power, doesn't need to threaten. It only needs to wait. Out there, between stars, time stretches so wide that entire civilizations can rise and fall between decisions. If something chose to look at us now, it did so knowing that whatever comes next doesn't need to happen soon. And that is the most sobering confirmation of all. The universe is not in a hurry. We are. That difference in urgency is easy to miss, but it matters more than anything else. We rush because we feel time pressing in on us. Resources, lifespans, political cycles, generations. Everything about human decision-making is compressed. Whatever interacted with 3I, Atlas, is not compressed. It doesn't feel deadlines the way we do. And when two systems with wildly different senses of time intersect, the slower one always has the advantage. That's why the encounter feels unsettling in hindsight. Not because of what happened, but because of how little had to happen for the meaning to land. A small deviation, a faint signal, a quiet response. Enough to force a rethink, not enough to trigger panic. In the weeks that followed, philosophers of science were quietly pulled into conversations that had previously belonged only to astrophysicists. Not to speculate wildly, but to address something more basic. If the universe contains systems capable of monitoring emerging civilizations, then discovery is no longer neutral. Knowledge itself becomes part of the environment. That's a heavy idea. It suggests that progress carries visibility, and visibility carries consequence, even if that consequence is delayed beyond any human horizon. For centuries, humanity has treated the cosmos like a backdrop, a stage where events happen, but nothing watches back. 3I, Atlas, cracked that illusion. Not by proving intent, but by demonstrating symmetry. We observed it. It responded, even subtly, even minimally. That symmetry changes the relationship forever. After that point, pretending the universe is indifferent becomes harder to defend. This doesn't mean every strange object is artificial. It doesn't mean every signal is a message. It means the boundary between natural and intentional is thinner than we assumed. And when you cross that boundary, even briefly, you don't cross back unchanged. The most experienced scientists involved in the analysis weren't the most alarmed. They were the most reflective. Many of them had spent careers assuming that if contact ever happened, it would be unmistakable, loud, clear, undeniable. Instead, what they encountered was ambiguity layered with precision, a kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. That realization leads to a strange inversion. The real danger is not that something out there misunderstands us. The real danger is that we misunderstand ourselves. Because if we are being observed at all, then our long-term behavior matters more than any single discovery. How we handle power, how we handle difference, how we handle the unknown when it refuses to resolve neatly. 3I. Atlas didn't resolve anything. It complicated everything. It forced a quiet question into the background of modern science. Not, are we alone, but what kind of neighbors would we be if we weren't? That question doesn't have an answer you can calculate. It unfolds over time through choices that seem unrelated in the moment, through restraint or recklessness, through cooperation or fragmentation, through patience or panic. And that's why the story doesn't end when the object disappears. Because disappearance doesn't mean disengagement. It means the observation phase has paused, that the system has gathered enough data for now, and somewhere, sometime, that data may be referenced again. When that happens, the most important factor won't be what 3I Atlas was. It will be who we became after it passed through our sky. After that point, it became clear that the story of 3I Atlas was never really about astronomy alone. Astronomy was just the lens that caught it. What it exposed ran deeper into how fragile our assumptions actually are when they're stretched across cosmic scale. Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't like to sit with. If something out there noticed us, even briefly, then it didn't do so because we are remarkable. It did so because we are changing. And change is what systems monitor. Stable planets don't get attention. Stable stars don't get attention. Stable civilizations don't get attention. It's the ones in transition that matter. The ones crossing from one state into another. The ones that haven't decided what they are yet. That's where Earth sits right now. We are no longer a quiet biological world, but we are not yet a disciplined technological one. We sit in the middle, loud enough to be detected, immature enough to be unpredictable. And unpredictability is the one thing advanced systems tend to keep an eye on. That perspective casts a different light on the so-called fear surrounding 3I, Atlas. It isn't fear of invasion, it isn't fear of destruction, it's fear of relevance. The realization that our actions may matter beyond our own survival for the first time in history. For most of our existence, humanity could afford to make mistakes in isolation. Wars, collapses, recoveries, all contained within one planet. Now, our mistakes echo outward. Our signals don't stop at the edge of the atmosphere. Our probes don't stop at the edge of the solar system. Our influence leaks into interstellar space, whether we intend it to or not. 3I. Atlas confirmed that leakage is detectable. And once something is detectable, it becomes part of a larger system, whether it likes it or not. Some researchers describe this moment as the end of cosmic innocence. Not because something bad happened, but because we can no longer assume privacy on a universal scale. Just as a child eventually learns they are being watched by the world around them, humanity may have just crossed that line, awkwardly, imperfectly, but irreversibly. What's striking is how little drama it took. No ships in the sky, no messages decoded on television, no undeniable proof waved in front of the public. Just math, motion, response. That subtlety is what makes it believable. Nature is rarely theatrical. Systems that endure rarely announce themselves. They test quietly, they measure patiently, they act only when necessary. If that is the case here, then 3I, Atlas, didn't come to scare us. It came to see if we were worth paying attention to at all. And attention in the universe is never free. It demands consistency. It demands learning. It demands restraint over time, not once. That may be the hardest part for us to accept, because humans are good at moments. We struggle with long arcs. We celebrate breakthroughs and ignore slow erosion. But whatever's out there, whatever systems may exist beyond our understanding, they live in long arcs. They don't care what we say we value. They care what we do repeatedly. So as the object fades from memory for most of the world, its true impact may only now be beginning. Not in observatories or datasets, but in how we choose to move forward, how loudly we speak into the cosmos, how recklessly we expand, how carefully we listen, because the next time something like this passes through our neighborhood, it won't be encountering a blank slate. It will be encountering the consequences of everything we decided after we realized we might not be alone in the way we once believed. And that realization, once it settles in, doesn't leave quickly. It waits, just like the universe does. And then the last confirmation arrived, not as a burst of light or a final ping, but as absence. When analysts overlaid every data set one more time, when they synchronized the final web frames with the closing radio logs and the outbound trajectory models, a simple truth emerged. The behavior stopped exactly when it no longer needed to continue. The pulses didn't decay like a dying system. They concluded cleanly, purposefully, as if a checklist had been completed and closed. That was the moment the room went quiet again. Because systems that fail trail chaos behind them. Systems that finish leave nothing extra. And 3I, Atlas, left nothing extra. No escalating signal, no lingering anomaly, no mistake. Just a completed interaction. What it confirmed wasn't that something is coming for us, or that something is hiding nearby, or that we're about to be contacted. It confirmed something far more difficult to sit with, that we were assessed briefly and precisely, and that assessment did not require further engagement at this time. In other words, we weren't ignored. We were noted. The fear people feel isn't about invasion. It's about timing. The realization that decisions made far from here on scales we can't influence may already include us as a variable, not a priority. Not a threat, just a factor. And factors don't get explanations. They get monitored. 3I. Atlas didn't speak because it didn't need to. It didn't warn us because warnings imply urgency. It didn't linger because lingering wastes energy. It confirmed what many suspected but never proved. That the universe contains systems patient enough to wait, subtle enough to observe, and advanced enough to move through star systems without leaving scars. It confirmed that the era of cosmic solitude is over, not with noise, but with acknowledgement. From this point forward, humanity moves differently, whether we admit it or not. Every deep space transmission, every coordinated observation, every expansion outward carries a quiet understanding beneath it. That we are no longer practicing in isolation, that our behavior may be logged somewhere beyond our reach, referenced at a time not of our choosing. Nothing dramatic has changed tonight. The sky looks the same, the stars are still distant, life continues. And that's exactly why this matters, because the most important shifts don't announce themselves. They settle in slowly, altering context rather than reality. 3, Atlas, didn't change the universe. It changed where we stand within it. And once you know you've been noticed, you don't get to pretend you're invisible again. If you want to keep following the signals others dismiss and understand what these quiet discoveries really mean, subscribe now and stay with us for the next chapter, waiting just beyond the dark.